Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Inclusion Starts Now. Today, I got to talk to Leila from Sprinkled. I knew I was going to mess this up. Sprinkled Spectrum. And she is a new account and she is just thriving. She has so much good content. She just has such great content, brings up so many good discussions. And I mean, the second I saw her via social media, I was like, how can I be your friend? So, of course, I had to ask her to be on this podcast because I am dying for all of you to hear her speak. This podcast is brought to you by candles. If you can light up anything, go light up a fun candle. Go take a bath with some beautiful ambiance. I recently read a book and I forgot what it's called, but it was also the title was in another language. So that's not going to be helpful because I'm not going to say it the right way. Uh, but it talked about how people who light more candles are happier because they're calmer and they get to it reminds them to kind of like take a breath, to like live in the moment. So if that's what we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. Go safely light candles. Make sure to blow them out when you're done with it and enjoy the ambiance and enjoy this conversation with Layla. So, and also, it's Layla?
Yes.
Layla. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, and I'm
Layla and
Kayla.
Kayla. I know
My
we
God.
rhyme. Yeah, I love it.
That's so cool. How did I not even notice? Okay. Totally professional now.
Yes. Well, for now.
For now, until, we have like 5 minutes of professionalism in us.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Layla. I have a platform slash community called Sprinkled Spectrum on Instagram and TikTok. It is about neurodiversity affirming parenthood and autism advocacy. I met you there and
Mhm.
just really excited to be here chatting with you.
When did you start your social media accounts?
I was actually just thinking about that. July of this last year. So July 2024. So it's
Oh
been
my
about what?
gosh.
Yeah.
Well,
Hmm.
you came in like knowing what to do. The second I saw you, I was like, oh my gosh, how have I not met her
Oh,
before?
that's very kind of you. Prior to that, I was in like brand strategy and creative copywriting and content. So it's kind of like my world in a way. But I just one day was like, I'm just gonna do this. And I just posted
Yeah.
something and kind of didn't stop.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I absolutely love your content. And I feel like
Thank you.
you post about things that are, I mean, I guess, okay. The, I feel like one of the issues, like one of the barriers of like really understanding the disabled community sometimes is like the arguments within the community.
Mm,
And it's like already like this minority group, but then
right.
sometimes I feel like there's all these little subgroups of people
Totally.
who so strongly believe. And
Right.
I was having this conversation with someone about like, do you say disabled person or person with disabilities?
Right.
And this is a person who forever was like disabled person, disabled person. And then he
Yeah.
finally was like, as long as they say disability, I'm cool with it. Like,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, like, because I mean, language
Language
is,
is important. Language is really important. And I think what's really interesting about what I'm trying to do is that I am a parent. I am not a disabled person myself. I raise one. And so I am really careful not to co-opt the autistic experience and instead to try to amplify autistic people's experiences. That's something that I'm like so incredibly conscious of, because I really believe that autistic people are the only experts. And whether
Mhm.
there are conversations within their own community, I try to learn from all of the perspectives within the community. I have a few friends that I've met on the platform who are always willing to share insights with me, and I learned so much from them. But I think what's really interesting is that as a parent, there are a lot of opinions and there is
Mhm.
a lot of judgment and there is a lot of figuring stuff out. And so, what I try to do, and I don't think you asked me this, but I just want to share this, is what I
I
try
want
to
you to share
do
it.
Yeah, what I try to do with the platform is to A, learn from autistic experiences, and then B, offer a different perspective of something that has been so highly stigmatized for so long as a parent, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of what the goal is.
Can you give an example of that?
For sure. So there's like a big, uh, obviously, I mean, emotional experience around a diagnosis. And so many people avoid it as parents because we're the ones who have to initiate that action, right? We have to see something and then raise it with our doctor or our pediatrician or whomever, and take that action. But there's a lot of stigma around quote unquote a label. And so,
Mm.
and even I heard that. You don't want to label her, wait till she's 5, so much can change. And I think what's really interesting from where I am after having gotten a diagnosis for my child and having heard all of this is that the diagnosis doesn't actually put them into a box, it takes them out of one. So many times when a child doesn't, when we don't understand a child's neurotype, they are labeled with other things like quote unquote bad behavior or quote
Hmm.
unquote, delayed or whatever. But once you understand that this is just the way their brain works in this world, it opens up the door for support and to be able to, advocate for them and allow them to exist as they are and be seen for who they are. And I think I try to offer that kind of a perspective where I'm like, hey, this isn't like this bad thing. This is actually like a really positive thing. Like I understand your emotion around it, and I understand that people are telling you like don't label your kid, but it actually is a really great and powerful thing for you and for your child, most importantly.
Yeah.
That's an example.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that so much because I mean
Mm-hmm.
I've been so my youngest, we just recently started speech therapy for him.
Yeah.
Because he just, he was missing some speech milestones. And
Sure.
and
Sure.
of course, as a special education teacher, I'm like, well, yeah, early intervention is the
Yeah.
best thing ever. Like,
For
why
sure.
wouldn't I get the support
Yes.
that I
Support,
need?
support, support.
Yeah. And and how many people when I would tell them and they're like, "Oh yeah, I had a boy too," and they just don't talk till later.
Oh
Boys are
yeah.
slower. Like
Oh
there's
my
so
gosh.
many excuses that people like to give, and I'm like,
Yeah,
this isn't a bad thing. It's just like,
it is what it is.
I
And
just
like,
want to give him the support. Like,
absolutely. Like, why would I deprive my kid of support because of, and what I always go back to, my own ego, like,
yeah,
or society's, um, like very neuronormative standards. It's
yeah,
like, it blows my mind. But I had a journey to get here, I, when I first noticed that my daughter had speech differences. I got her into speech therapy in Washington, and
yeah,
I met the most incredibly affirming, wonderful group of speech therapists. And I was like, do you think this means she's autistic? And they're like, well, we don't know. Like a lot of kids who acquire language this way as Gestalt language processors are autistic, but not all of them are, kind of thing.
yeah,
And I was like, okay. And so I kind of just like sat on it for like a year and a half. I sat on it and I was just like processing and trying to understand like her way and who she was. And, then I got us on a list and then I got us, so
yeah,
it is a process for a lot of people. And I try to like, I'll never judge anyone for their own, understanding of this whole experience. And I think part of it is like, I want to create a safe space with the community that I've created for people to ask, like, hey, I'm feeling these things about this. Like, what do you think?
yeah,
If they want to, I'm always there. I get DMs all the time about like, hey, my kid's doing this, 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 and this. Like, what do you think? And I'm like, listen, I'm no expert, but I can find people who are,
yeah,
or I can give you some camaraderie and unity and be like, hey, solidarity, I see you in that.
yeah. And I
Mhm.
think that is really important for parents to also have that community that is there to like uplift and support each other because you are, I mean, you are now taking a different route. Like even going through like the speech therapy process, it's like,
Yeah.
I know that a lot of the other kids that we talk to have not, I mean, whether they need speech therapy or not, they have not chosen that. And
Hmm.
it is like extra steps of parenting of being like, okay, I'm going to look into this, this, and this, and I'm going to do this.
Yeah,
Um, and I mean, it could be overwhelming. It's overwhelming to get,
absolutely. Hmm.
so much
It is.
information. And I feel like a lot of people feel that with like autistic diagnoses, getting
Hmm.
like an autistic
Absolutely.
diagnosis.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Because yeah, and I've shared this story before, but I feel like it really works here, where I used to
Yeah.
work in the deafblind community,
Yeah.
and we would work with families, and it would be like right after parents got a diagnosis of that their child has something where a lot of it was like Usher syndrome, where you're
Okay.
born deaf or hard of hearing, and then
Yep.
you, throughout your life, your vision lowers.
Okay.
Sometimes you will go like all the way 100% blind. Sometimes it just kind of becomes these little pinholes. Um, but I don't think I was actually prepared as like the educator to understand where the parents were coming from of like this state of like fear and
Mm.
like sadness.
Worry. Yeah. Hmm.
And yeah, and it's like hard because it's like you want to support them, but you're also like, don't be sad in front of your kid. Like they're gonna be great. Like you now know and you can
Yeah.
get the support. Like,
Hmm.
but now looking back at that, I wish I kind of was like, this is also a safe place for you. This is a lot of new
Yeah.
information and new steps that like you never
Yeah.
knew that you were gonna be taking.
For sure. And I think the word disability scares a lot of people.
Mhm.
And I think like that story, what I'm hearing is number one, empathy for the lived experience of, everyone involved. And then also just like destigmatizing that this is like a terrible thing, you know?
Yeah.
I'll speak specifically to autism because that's the world that I'm in, but I think so many people see it as like this terrifying, like immediately you're like, what does this mean for my kid? What is it like? What am I gonna, you
Yeah.
know? And disability, it's not a disability. And it's like, I see you in all of those racing thoughts. Um, but let me offer this perspective, like let's listen to
Yeah.
autistic adults and what they have to say about living in this world as an autistic person. And let's, be there for our children and let's promote a positive self-identity. Like
Yes.
it's so important for us to instill a positive self-identity for our disabled kids, so that they don't grow up in this world feeling lesser than or othered. And that's not to say that it's not going to happen. I'm sure it will, I'm a realist, but I'm going to do my darndest to ensure that she feels loved and supported and like she belongs exactly
Yeah.
as she is.
I love that so
Yeah.
much. I mean,
Yeah.
everything you're saying just makes so much sense of like the because I mean like the self-identity, the positive self-identity, I
Yeah.
feel the like the whole societal norms of like, no, this
Yeah.
is how you should be acting.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't no nobody acts all the same.
Yeah. And
Like
like
there
why? Like what? Like some
yeah,
things are so arbitrary that I'm just like like what? Like
like
I
it's not
actually
even
talked
fun.
no, like Halloween, for example, okay?
Hmm.
The whole thing is absurd if you really think about it. You're like, so you want me to dress up in some synthetic thing, knock on a stranger's door, and request candy in a very specific way, you
Yeah.
know? And I always think about that. I'm like, if I were like a literal thinker, I would ask, why do I have to do this? Like, why can't I just get the candy just because I'm a kid and I should be able to
Yeah.
participate in the joy of it? So little things like that where I'm like these neuronormative experiences that we're all just like that we all just grow up with essentially, not all, but as a neurotypical person, I'm like, wait a minute. If I now that I see the world through her eyes, I'm like, that's totally insane. Why can't I just
Yeah.
have the candy? Like, yeah, that's just one
That
example.
no, because I've actually never thought of Halloween as much. other because but I do think a lot about like the Santa and Christmas
Right.
things where because I'm like so big on consent and
Same.
advocacy. And so I'm
Yes.
like, and then we like are telling our kids like, don't just talk to anybody on the street kind of thing. Like you don't know them. But I'm like the most extroverted person in the world. I've given my number to complete strangers in the grocery store. So I'm
Right.
going to tell
I'm the
my
same way.
kids like, I don't know, if you're talking to someone, you should
Yeah.
feel that safety. But
Yeah.
also like when we go and see someone dressed as Santa, I'm like, I would never like push them like, if you don't want to take a
For
picture with
sure.
Santa, that's fine. Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna probably because I
Yeah.
love Christmas.
Me? Yeah.
But
But and as an adult, you can consent to that experience,
yeah,
right? And there's the difference. And like my child, for example, she advocates for herself with gestures. She advocates for herself with like just, physically standing still in one place.
yeah,
Like if she's not, she doesn't yet have the access to the language to be like, no, this makes me uncomfortable. So I
yeah.
have to honor all of those different cues that she's giving me.
Oh,
Um,
totally.
and it's just like such a different way of being in the world, and I totally, yeah, it's just, but then I see how we like really push these neuronormative standards on all kids, and I'm like, this is like, why can't they just do things their way? It's okay,
Yeah.
their way is great.
Well, I've been talking so much to like people in our community of like their like non-verbal communication also is communication.
Mm-hmm.
Um like so like my kids, even though they are both like speaking,
Yeah,
they will sometimes not use words and they're still communicating something. And
yeah,
so it's like,
absolutely, absolutely,
why? Like that should be with anybody. Like if you're coming in for
for
a hug
sure.
and someone like tenses up, like are you really gonna keep going and hugging them? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we can
Yeah,
still, read each other's body language. And
for
I think
sure.
just all of that, like focusing on other areas of human behavior of like, facial
Mm-hmm.
expressions and body
Yeah.
language, like
Mm-hmm.
we should all be
Honor,
practicing to read that
for
and
sure.
like support each other.
Yeah, I talk about a lot. I talk about the prioritization of speech in our society. And it's interesting because something that has just by virtue of having a differently speaking, I call her a creative communicator because she uses multiple modalities to communicate. She has access to mouth words sometimes, so she'll use gestalts like scripts.
Hmm.
She uses hand leading, gestures, sometimes signs. She sometimes uses her communication device. So all of that is valid. And I think that we need part of what my mission is to continue to um, encourage everyone to see it that way. Like all communication is valid. We don't need to
Yeah.
put speech on this pedestal because some individuals can't. They just can't speak. Um, and that does not equate intelligence. Speech or the
Yes.
ability to speak does not equate intelligence. And I think that's something that is so like highly accepted in certain societies and in certain cultures and in certain generations that that's something that I'm super passionate about educating on.
Yeah, that's interesting because
Mhm.
this was I mean, of course I love this conversation and I've had this conversation before of course all communication is valid. But it kind of
Mhm.
just made me think of like going the total opposite way when people are like, "Oh, I can speak four languages." And like
Yeah,
I feel like the thought that we're like, "Whoa, you must be so smart. Like you can speak
totally.
four languages. You must
Yeah,
be smarter than me."
right.
Which is like I because I know that that's what I have personally thought and now I'm just like, "Why?"
Totally. I mean, that is a very impressive skill if that's their skill. But then what I equate that to is like, okay, well, a child like mine navigates this world that prioritizes speech without it, and she still communicates. And so that to me is intelligence. That to
Yeah.
me is competence. It's like you find a way to communicate your needs, your joy, your protests, your requests, you find a way despite lacking the not lacking, but despite not having access to the one thing that everybody expects you to. you know, like so
Yeah.
many times we're out in the world and someone's like, say this. And I'm like, I'm like, you don't have to say it. I'm like, you can show it, you
Yeah.
know? So
That's a,
yeah.
yeah.
Just for a little like perspective there, it's like, well, these kids and these individuals, like they're finding a way to communicate. And
Yeah.
that to me is like so incredibly intelligent and cool
Oh,
and
totally.
yeah,
I would say that like shows more critical thinking skills.
right. And like
I don't know
survival
more, but it
skills,
shows a
like how do
lot.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, like how do you exist this in this world? You know? Like
Yeah.
it's so cool. And yeah, I could go on for 100 hours about that.
Well, so
You're gonna have to rein me in.
did you know about like disabilities before like getting a diagnosis for your child?
Did I know about disability in general or about autism specifically?
Um, I mean, I kind of both. I want to know both.
Yeah. Very like recently prior to my daughter's diagnosis, yes, I had started learning about autism, specifically and other disability. I kind of have always grown up understanding that there are disabled individuals in this world, and that their existence is just as valid as anybody else's. But I never was like a learned person, you know, like I was doing my best to just be like to learn as much as I could, but I wouldn't say it was something that I was like conscious of in my every single day life, you know,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
wild. It's like, why aren't we all,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
I mean, that's pretty much why I think I've gone so into this like raising inclusive kids and like my own journey, social media journey of whatever it may be. But
Yeah.
'cause yeah, it felt like people only cared or I that might sound harsh. People like really only like knew if they knew someone with a disability. And
Yeah.
so
Totally.
it was like, well, I don't know, out of sight, out of mind. Like they just
Right.
didn't think
Just
about it. And I
keep
was like,
on, yeah,
no,
going with your
like
life.
we
Mm-hmm.
all have to think about it to make sure that like, you know, we can still all work together and like still like I
Absolutely.
mean, speaking of Halloween, I think whenever Halloween comes around, I always I'm posting stuff of like how to make trick or treating accessible and like, you know, how
Yes.
not to force kids to say trick or treat or like, you know, oh, they're not in a costume, they don't get candy. Like those rules should all be, you know, kicked out. Um, but I've never like because I mean, oh my gosh, for weeks later, my kids were like, "Can we go trick or treating again? Like, can we go get more candy?" And I'm like, it's just kind of
Duh,
like
it's
a once
the
a year thing."
candy. Yeah. That's
Um,
funny. I think one of the ways that I think about it is that, you know, like when you're walking on the sidewalk and there's a dip, right?
yeah,
For wheelchairs. I used to just stand in that dip and not be conscious at all that that was an accessibility feature that didn't exist for me to be standing there like a dummy, you
yeah,
know? And it's like that was brought to my attention when I had a stroller and I needed to use it, and other people would do that. And I was like, even still, it's not really for me. And like those kinds of things, I think everybody on earth needs to be conscious of. And that's like the very basic, you know, like
yeah,
alone like disability rights, you know, which is what it's now has become my passion, and advocacy, which is now. And I think in ways like you grow up learning about it and you grow up doing it in specific ways, but not really making it like the forefront of your advocacy or the forefront of your mind, until, as you said, you know someone with a disability, or you become someone with a disability, or you birth someone with a disability, you know?
yeah.
Um, and that's not how it should be. It should be top of mind for everyone,
Yeah. I
in my
mean,
opinion.
which I feel like is why DEI is so important to
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
companies, you know, kind of being forced to think about it. Like,
Absolutely.
I mean,
Mm.
how many people, I mean, even thinking of it as like a selfish money grabbing way, how many customers are you losing because you're not accessible to everybody or because you don't have like
Right.
stuff that they want because you're just so close-minded in like
Yeah,
the area
I
that you
know.
know?
I know. And sadly, what I think is so important, and like again, I'll speak to the autism community, is like I hear this saying, it's like nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
Like not only do they deserve a seat at the table, but it's like their voices and experiences should be centered. Like there
Yeah.
are so many people that are experts in, you know, you got pediatricians, you got speech, you got OT, you got other therapists, you've got all sorts of things. But it's like, but what really needs to be centered and amplified is the lived experience, you
Yeah.
know? And I think that is what we need to continue to push for as advocates. Um, and like I said, like I'm so conscious of even with my own platform, like not centering my own experience because it's not about me. It's like, how can I amplify the lived experience of autistic people?
Yeah. And
Hmm.
I love how you do it. I mean, again, you just like you bring up really good topics. Oh my gosh, that's I haven't even looked at the questions that I sent you.
I know we're just
That's
yapping
what
away over
happened.
here.
Um, okay, what was it? Oh, the everyone has autism one
Mm.
that you
Everyone's
posted.
a little bit autistic.
And I have heard that, and I honestly don't even know what to say when people say that to me because they're like, well, aren't we just all a little autistic? I mean, the
Yeah.
first thing I'm like, I mean, we all have brains that work differently, but some people it like goes more with what society wants you to do, and some
Yeah.
people need
I
extra
mean,
support. Like,
well,
it,
here's what I usually say.
okay, good, go. And I'm
Let
gonna
me
like
tell
write
you.
this down. I have a
Yeah.
flashcard.
So
Be
this
ready.
might be like a little bit of a meandering way to get to my point, but there is this psychologist. His name is Dr. Barry Prezant. He wrote this book called Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Viewing Autism. And he says autistic traits are human traits amplified. I'm paraphrasing.
Hmm.
But autistic traits are human traits, okay? So I think that's what people are speaking to when they say we're all a little autistic, quote unquote. But we're not. There is this very specific set and subset of things that need to be met to receive a diagnosis. And when you
Hmm.
say we're all a little autistic, what you're doing is diminishing the lived experience of autistic people. You're trivializing their challenges and you're also trivializing their joy.
Yeah.
There is a very unique experience, lived experience when you are an autistic person. And saying that really just takes away from that. And I try to educate people and say, like, we're actually not all a little autistic. Um, Autistic people have and this is maybe going to speak to that. You wanted me to speak to neurodiversity, neurodivergent, and
Yeah.
neurotypical. Yeah.
Love
So
the
like
yes.
then I usually segue into that. I'm like, we all have different brains. That's neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the understanding that each of us has a different brain, which you spoke to. Some brains, according to data and society for now, are more common. Those brains are called,
I love how you just defined that.
well, it's like we don't have enough research. Like now
Yeah.
it's like 1 in 5 brains they say are neurodivergent. So we're still learning, right? So some brains are more common. Those are called neurotypical brains. The society deems those brains to be more common. Brains that diverge from that common brain are under the umbrella of neurodivergent brains. So we're not all a little, and then autism lives within that umbrella. And so
Yeah.
does ADHD, so does BPD, so does OCD, so does dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. There are a bunch.
Yeah.
So I always like try to educate, educate, educate. And I'm like, we're not. And don't say
Yeah.
that because here's why.
And I mean, I think 1 in 5, I do think is too low. I do think it's higher. And
Mhm.
this one woman that I interviewed, oh gosh, her podcast I think is called Parenting While Autistic. I think that's what
Oh,
it is.
wow.
So
Okay.
she
I gotta
became a
listen.
parent and then basically realized like got her autistic diagnosis.
Was
Um,
it through one of like, did she start like, was her child autistic and then she started to understand that she had some similarities with her child?
um, I don't even know if
Okay.
she knows because I think at this point when I talked to her, her daughter was like a year or
Oh,
really
wow.
young.
Okay.
But it
Okay.
was
Yeah.
more that she started realizing that like without her breaks and without her like her time to like kind of
Decompress.
like yeah, decompress because you don't really get that with babies. That
Yeah.
all of a sudden she realized this like sensory overload and then she just didn't realize how much she was like masking around
Wow.
everybody
Yeah.
until she had a baby that was like making it really hard for her to mask all the time because then she
For
was masking
sure.
so much more. And so she said, I mean, she's like in her 30s and she was like, I went all my life thinking what I would do because like one of her examples was like in the car before she goes to like her husband's family, she would be like scripting. She'd be like, okay, so this is what I'm going to ask them. And she would like plan out these
For sure.
conversations
Yes.
and to like, make her feel more confident in the room with everyone. But then
Yeah.
all of a sudden she was like, "Oh, wait, I was like not everybody does that." And so she started like having these moments that she just like did not see until having a baby. And I thought that
Wow.
was really interesting because so
So
she was telling me
cool.
she's like, I wish more people would try to take like the RADS. Is it RADS? The
Yes,
like
the
online
RADS
test,
test. Hmm.
but try not to mask. Like, don't say the answers that you're like trying to get to. You genuinely have to be like, oh no, that does make me really uncomfortable, or that is
Yeah.
really hard.
Yes.
So
I
I
have
thought that was
sent that
really
test.
interesting.
That is so cool. I have sent that test to everybody I know. I
Oh,
just think it is the
yeah,
coolest thing ever. I
I
took
love
it
it.
and oh, I love it. I think it is just fascinating. I love the way that it explains like each of uh the grading and the like criteria.
Yeah,
It's like comes from a very neurodiversity affirming lens, I think, which is obviously something I'm very passionate about.
yeah.
Yeah, they say 1 in 5 are neurodivergent and 1 in 38 are autistic.
Okay.
So, and there's a lot of like contention and hypotheses and questioning around quote unquote the rise in the diagnosis of autism,
Oh,
which has been
yeah.
something that I have spoken on a lot as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, autism, what was it in the 70s or 80s when people started
Yeah,
like
I mean,
name
it
it?
was initially studied in the 40s and actually before that, but it just was called something else. And then the 80s it actually became something that was, in the diagnostic in the DSM.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it wasn't even an official diagnosis until the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say
Yeah.
one of my favorite trends that people do is when like they're talking about their child, like their autistic child, and then a
Mhm.
grandparent is like, they're not autistic, that's what I've done. And you're like, oh, huh, cool.
Light bulb.
'Cause, yeah,
Yep.
we have my partner's dad.
Yeah.
He's never had a formal diagnosis, but
Hmm.
he has a doctor friends. That's
Who
like a
have been
weird way
like,
to say that. But his doctor friend is like, like, have you ever considered being on the autism spectrum?
for sure.
And I think the more he looked into it, the more he was like, oh,
I can
yeah.
see this. Yeah, totally.
So
That's why I asked about the
yeah,
woman that you interviewed because that happens so much that parents take their children for an assessment and throughout that entire process, whether they're answering the parent participation portion or what, they're like, wait a minute, I can
yeah,
relate to so much of this. And then they themselves end up getting a diagnosis. It's
yeah,
really cool. Like I always, am like love to hold space for people if they want to share that with me. And a few parents have shared that with me. And I like well up with joy for them because I have seen what it has unlocked for my
yeah,
daughter. And I think, a lot of the time people have shared with me that they've gone their whole life just feeling different and, like an alien, a couple of them have said.
yeah.
And it's like you have these answers now. And what that does for like healing your inner child, I think is really beautiful.
Oh,
Or can be,
definitely.
can be really beautiful. Yeah, I won't like paint anything with broad brushstrokes because I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody has their own experience. Yeah.
Well, I'm actually interested in like neuroaffirming parenting. Like, is that
Hmm.
that's the term you used at the
Yeah.
beginning?
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like I do that for my kids. And sometimes I wonder, I'm like, are we going to miss a diagnosis because I'm
Mm.
so like because of my experience and my like just trying to be
Totally.
neuroaffirming, I'm like, okay, when will I actually be like, oh, wait a minute, let's see if you do get a diagnosis so we could like make sure you get the
Yeah,
services you need or something. Like,
for sure.
have you
It's
ever talked to people
interesting.
about that?
Yeah, I do actually. I find that that seems to be the case with like teachers and psychologists. They're like, I already just like live this way, so I might have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to my own kid because I'm like,
Yeah.
A, you have so much experience with so many different kinds of children. You've always from the conversations I've had, it's like they're like, this is just, kids. But then you start to really look at certain things and you're like, wait a minute, maybe that could require some support.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's definitely something that I have heard about a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still shocked that I remembered thinking to like get speech therapy for my own kid when all of a sudden we were like at the doctor's, maybe like a 2.5 year appointment. And I was like, do you feel like we should get speech? Like,
Yeah. And
I
what did
kind
they
of feel like we
say?
should. They said, yeah, they were like, I mean, if you want to, now's the time. It was this whole
That's
thing
great.
of like getting individual family support plan because at 3, you're in the public education system.
Yeah.
So she was like, it's better to do it now. So there's like family support before you go into the school
Oh,
section,
that's
which I was like,
interesting.
I'm like, oh, I knew that, but I also didn't like
Yeah.
know
It didn't
that.
apply to your own kid. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah.
so interesting.
So
Yeah,
it's
I'm
been
glad.
interesting to just go through this whole thing because like then the speech therapist comes over and she's like, "Yeah, it's kind of weird talking to you because like you know all this information,
Right.
but you can
Mm-hmm.
see how it's just like different when it's like the kid that you're with all the time who has a sibling and like
Yeah.
you're also navigating so many other things you don't always think about like this
Mm-hmm.
one support that you're like trying to get for them."
It's super
It's just
interesting. It
complicated.
it became pretty glaring for us when she was around her peers that she would require support with speech and with occupational therapy. And I think that's how, because she's the oldest and she was our first.
Oh
So we were
yeah.
like, we were like, wait a minute. Like people say, between 2 and 3, they can have these like huge leaps in speech. So we'll just. And then we put her in soccer.
Yeah.
And my kid was the kid. And I always say, I just think she's the coolest cat ever. Like, I really am just when I grow up, I want to be her. She's so freaking cool. But she really just did her own thing. She was like,
Yeah.
your directions? Nope. It's like in one ear out the other. She was just like doing things that were totally sensory seeking. And like all the other kids we're doing it.
Yeah.
And so, that was I had no idea because it was my first kid and I was like, "Oh, I just have that kid who's like a little rascal." But that was communicating to me that she needed support because her receptive language wasn't where her peers were, which I don't, she's on her own journey now and I know that now. And that she needed support because she needed input and I needed to give her that input. That's what the sensory
Yeah.
seeking was showing me. So that's kind of how we came to the conclusion that like, hey, we should probably get her in speech, maybe. And then when she was at speech, they were like, yeah, tell us about some of the things that you're seeing with regards to her movements. Like she would spin till, the cows came home.
Yeah.
Spinning, 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 spinning. Never get dizzy. It was just like in awe of this little
Oh my
spinner.
gosh. I can't even
Mhm.
watch people spin anymore.
Same. I'm the
After
most
pregnancy, I'm
not
like, oh
same.
no,
I am the
I'm
most
done.
nauseous human alive now. And I'm like,
Dude,
what
I
happened?
was so cool. I was so cool until
Yeah.
I gave
I
birth.
was
And then it
never
was
cool.
like, I
Like,
can't even swing.
oh my God, I always got like nauseous, like sitting in the back of the car, for example. And then
Yeah.
yeah, after pregnancy, especially with my second one, I'm like, you're right, I can't get on a swing. I'm like, perfect.
Okay. I know we do have to leave soon, but
Yes.
I can't remember if I told you, I end my podcast with a cat tarot card reading. Not with all these post-it notes on it.
Love
This cat
it.
tarot card reading.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
I have been asked to actually actually to learn tarot because I don't. I just read the book and then we kind of come up with our own thing.
That's so
But someone
fun.
was like, you should probably do an episode with someone who can like teach you tarot. And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that makes sense. So if you know anybody,
That sounds incredible.
um,
I will ask around.
yeah, I keep meaning to like post being like, does anyone actually know tarot? And can you teach me, please?
Yeah, I don't, but
Um,
I'll find someone for you.
Uh, but while I shuffle, it is nice. Like if you want to think of a question or if you have any sort of question, that's
Okay.
good.
Do I have to say it out loud
Um,
or can I think
I
it in
mean,
my
if
head?
you could say it in your head, but then it would be kind of weird
On
to
a
anybody
podcast?
listening who's like, cool, I hope that was
Wow.
good for them.
I wonder what my question would be. I don't know. Can it just be general, like about
Yeah.
my,
So some
yeah,
people are
my
like,
path?
how's my year gonna go? Like,
Ooh, that sounds good. Yeah, how's my year gonna go?
oh, perfect. And then tell me when to stop shuffling.
Okay, stop.
And then while I find the answer for
Mm-hmm.
the card,
Yeah.
can you give like an example? Or I'm trying to think like, well, first, I do want you to say where people can reach you because I
Okay.
think you are so knowledgeable and I just like
Oh gosh.
love everything that you do.
Thank you.
Um,
That means a
I
lot.
just
I'm
seriously am so
learning.
happy we've connected.
Same.
But I feel like I feel like the best people to learn from are people who are like, I have so much more to learn. Like
Oh, I am
they're
literally
the best educators.
yeah, I just feel like my mission is to be a perpetual learner, just constantly learning. I am not an expert at anything. I am just a mom who loves her kid and wants to make the world a better place for her and kids like her. That's literally it.
Yeah.
So I always am like cautious to be like, I research a lot. It's one of my passions, and that's maybe why I sound knowledgeable, but I'm just like sharing facts that I've learned, you
You
know?
are knowledgeable.
I
You
appreciate that.
are.
Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that.
So this does not look like the happiest card,
That's
but we are
okay.
going to
That's
read it
fine.
because the card, oh, sometimes, anyways, it's the Nine of Swords and it has this
Ooh,
like crying face, but we're going
that's
to read it.
okay. Listen, maybe it's going to be an emotional year for me. That's real.
That's real. And then and see, I also forgot to talk to you about this one. You talked about inviting kids, like
Oh
making sure to
yeah.
invite all kids
Inclusion.
to birthday parties and like,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you have any, like, as a parent, is there
Hmm.
something that you wish you could tell other parents?
Yes. Lots.
And while you say that, I will look in
You'll
my
read.
tarot book.
So I do speak a lot. So part of the reason why I make my platform like I do, like TikTok trends and I do whatever, it's because I want to reach a larger audience that includes parents of neurotypical children. And
Hmm.
I want them to learn about our kids so that they can teach their kids about our kids and so that they can raise inclusive little beings. And so it's really important for me to speak about things like that, which are such a reality for so many parents of autistic kids and for so many autistic kids. Like, I can't tell you how many parents commented on that reel about me saying, please invite our autistic kids to your birthday parties, saying my kid hasn't been invited to a single one this year. It's just way too common. And
Yeah.
so it's super intentional for me to speak on those things so that parents of children who are neurotypical can understand, like, hey, this is happening. And like, we need our, like, no child is born prejudiced, you know? And I'm not saying it's a parenting thing, it's not.
Yeah.
But we can parent them to learn about other kids and their way in this world. And
Yeah.
I try to always offer also like age appropriate quote unquote ways to explain. Like for example, if I'm speaking about my daughter, I might say to a child of a similar age range that's neurotypical, I might say like, hey, she loves playing with you, but the way that she shows that is by playing beside you. She
Yeah.
might not interact with you, but she still loves to be with you, you know?
Yeah.
Or like she may not answer back, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't hear you, you
Yeah.
know?
No, that's so simple and so easy to add to our language when educating other kids.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I remember once I was doing Girls on the Run, like a coaching thing, and it was with
Shoot,
fourth and fifth graders.
there you go. Sorry. Yeah, Girls on the Run. What was that?
I was a coach, like a running coach for
Oh,
fourth and fifth
fun.
graders, and it's like an
Love that.
anti-bullying thing. It's super cute.
I love that.
And we had a substitute that was autistic. And so whenever she came, like people didn't always know how to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so one time they like in at Girls on the Run, they were like they were kind of they weren't really making fun of her, but they were kind of like talking about her like what was she doing or what was this? And I'm
Oh,
like, oh well,
yeah.
like, some people are diagnosed with autism. And they were like,
Yeah.
oh, what does diagnosed mean? I'm like, oh
Yeah.
no. Okay,
Yeah.
I messed
We
up. I
got a lot
messed
to do
up.
here.
I'm like, never
No,
mind.
but
Let me circle back somewhere else.
yeah, but it's indicative of the amount of like, or sorry, the lack rather of information that kids have about different kids.
Yeah.
And I think like you can speak on this. That's why I think inclusive classrooms are so important. And like right now my daughter is in a mixed peers class. And so her neurotypical peers and her autistic peers are all existing and learning about one another.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a whole other, like we could do 10
I
episodes on that, but
I was gonna say we could talk for like
yeah,
way more, but no,
yeah.
you need to go. So we are gonna do this.
I gotta
Okay.
get nap
So
time.
it said some anxiety. Your
Oh,
anxiety is leading
story of
you
my life.
your your anxiety is leading you into a dark thought cycle. Don't let these thoughts become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Seek guidance from others to gain an outside perspective.
Mm,
Dang. And I actually feel like for you starting social media just like 6 months ago,
yeah.
like, I mean, you did say you were in content creation like before,
Yeah.
but I know
Social,
it's so hard when it's like something so personal to you. And when your
oh, it's so
videos like get to
hard.
that viral place and people start saying things and you're just like, oh my gosh, like it could
Kayla,
be
the
sad.
vitriol that people have spit already, and like you said, when you care so deeply, it stings and it really dysregulates your nervous system. Having said that, I think I'm like I've gotten to a better place of being like blockety block, like you're done.
Yeah.
There's no space. This is a safe space. There's no space for that kind of stuff here, but it definitely affects. I'm an
Yeah.
anxious cat. I am an anxious cat. I love therapy for that very reason. So
Yeah.
this makes a lot of sense to me. I'm like, all
Oh
right.
man. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry it wasn't the most sun. It wasn't like a cat laying in the sun. Sometimes,
You know
this
what?
cat has like a frog cup and it's all
Let's do
cool.
another reading in 6 months and see where we're at.
Yes, we definitely will. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much
Awesome.
for being here. I'll make sure to
Yeah,
put
thank
like
you.
your social media handles
Yes.
below so people can find you.
Amazing. That'd be
Um,
great. Thank you for having me on. I feel very honored that you've asked me to be a part of this very special podcast that you've created.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah, of
seriously, the
course.
community that I found on social media has like
I
really been
know.
amazing.
Doesn't it just eclipse all the nonsense when you think about like the positivity that you have gained from it and the souls that you've connected with, and you're just like, all right, this makes it worth it, even though it's a lot of work and you get some of
Yes,
the crazies. Yeah,
it
totally.
totally,
Yeah,
just 100%.
I
Beautifully
agree.
said.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to have met you and let's chat soon.
Yes, let's. We'll have a good nap time.
Thank you. If only I could nap myself.
Thank you, everybody, for joining me and Layla during our conversation on just, parenting, how to be good parents for, and how to keep raising
Neurotypical and
those inclusive
neurodivergent
kids.
children.
Thank you so much for being here. Now go light that candle, and I'll talk to you later. Inclusion starts with you, and I just want to help.